Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in Divrei Torah, matters of Torah. This week we are in Parshat Vayera, which begins in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, with verse 1. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, together we can recite our blessing for this opportunity. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu asher shanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We'll read through our English translation of the Torah portion. I'll share with you a little bit of a focus study, and then we'll open it up for everyone to have an opportunity to share his or her responses, thoughts about this week's Torah portion. Chapter 18 in the book of Genesis with verse 1. Adonai appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, Adonai, if it please you, do not go past on your servant. Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, and recline under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way. They replied, do as you have said. And Sherry, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 6? And Rico, perhaps you could go to the front door. I think I heard a door. Okay.
Thank you. Abraham hastened to the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead and make cakes. Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to the servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them until under the tree as they ate.
Thank you. And then we invite Dave Leb. Would you like to read there at verse 9?
Okay. They said to him, where is your wife Sarah? And he replied, there in the tent. Then one said, I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah shall have a son. Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tongue, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? And then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child as old as I am? Is there anything too wondrous for the Lord? I will return to you at the same season next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Sarah lied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was frightened. But he replied, you did laugh.
Thank you, Dave. And June, would you like to read beginning at verse 16?
Thank you, Rabbi. And the men rose up from thence and looked out towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that which I am doing, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him to the end that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, to the end that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. And the Lord said, verily, the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and verily their sin is exceedingly grievous. I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know.
Thank you, Jude. Margot, would you like to read verse 22?
Yes, thank you. This is a wonderful story. I mean, it's just wonderful. And Lot should, never mind. The men went in from there to Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Abraham came forward and said, "Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that the innocent and guilty alike fare alike. Far be it from you shall not far be it from you, shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly?" And the Lord answered, "If I find within the city of Sodom 50 innocent ones, I will forgive the whole place for their sake." Abraham spoke up, saying, "Here I venture to speak, my Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. What if the 50 innocent should lack 5? Will you destroy the whole city for want of the 5? And he answered, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." But he spoke to him again, and he said, what if the 40 should be found there? And he answered, "I will not do it for the sake of the 40. And he said, "Let not my Lord be angry if I go on. What if 30 should be found there?" And he answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." And he said, "I venture again to speak, my Lord. What if 20 should be found there?" And he answered, "I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. And then he said, "Let not my Lord be angry if I speak but this last time. What if 10 should be found there?" And he answered, "I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. I love it.
Okay. Very nice.
Oh, no, there's one more line.
Yes.
And when the Lord had finished speaking to Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place.
Thank you, Mario. And David and Susan, would you like to pick up there, chapter 19?
Yes, thank you. And the two messengers came into Sodom at evening, when Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And Lot saw, and he rose to greet them and bowed with his face to the ground. And he said, "Oh, please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet, and you can set off early on your way." And they said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." And he pressed them hard, and they turned aside to him and came into his house, and he prepared them a feast and baked flat bread, and they ate. They had not yet lain down when the men of the city, the men of Sodom, drew round the house, from lads to elders, every last man of them. And they called out to Lot and said, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." And Lot went out to them at the entrance, closing the door behind him, and he said, "Please, my brothers, do no harm. Look, I have 2 daughters who have known no man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you want. Only to these men do nothing, for have they not come under the shadow of my roof beam?" And they said, "Step aside." And they said, "This person came as a sojourner, and he sets himself up to judge. Now we'll do more harm to you than to them." And they pressed hard against the man Lot and moved forward to break down the door. And the men reached out their hands and drew Lot to them into the house and closed the door. And the men at the entrance of the house, they struck with blinding light from the smallest to the biggest, and they could not find the entrance. And the men said to Lot, "Whom do you still have here? Your sons and your daughters? And whomever you have in the city, take out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place because the outcry against them has grown great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it."
And Lot went out and he spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for Hashem is destroying the city." And he was like a joker in his sons-in-law's eyes. And as the dawn rose, The angels urged Lot, saying, "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are present, or else you'll be annihilated in the city's crime." And he delayed. And the people took hold of his hands and his wife's hand and his 2 daughters' hands because of Hashem's compassion for him. And they brought him out and set him outside of the city. And it was as they were bringing them outside, and he said, "Escape for your life. Don't look behind you and don't stop at all in the plane. Escape to the mountain, or else you'll be annihilated." And Lot said to them, "Let it not be, my lord. Here your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you've magnified your kindness that you've done for me, keeping my soul alive, and I'm not able to escape to the mountain in case the bad thing will cling to me and I'll die. Here, this city is close to flee there, and it's small. Let me escape there. Isn't it small? And my soul will live." And he said to him, "Here, I granted you this thing too, that I won't overturn the city of which you spoke. Quickly escape there, because I can't do a thing until you get there." And on account of this, the city's name was called Zoar.
Thank you both very much. Let me invite Justin, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 23?
Rabbi, thank you. I have technical difficulties, so
Okay, thank you. Robin, would you like to read there, verse 23?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The sun was rising over the land as Lot was going down to Zoar, and Adonai rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Adonai out of the heavens, overthrowing these cities and the entire plain, all the city's inhabitants and what grew in the soil. And his wife looked behind him and became a pillar of salt. Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had previously stood before Adonai. As he gazed down upon Sodom and Gomorrah and upon the whole face of the plain, lo, fumes were rising from the earth like fumes from a furnace. But when God destroyed the cities of the plain, God remembered Abraham, and when overthrowing the cities in which Lot had lived, sent Lot away from the upheaval. Together with his 2 daughters, Lot then went up from Zoar to live in the hill country, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. The firstborn now said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man left on earth to couple with us in the way of all the earth. Let us give our father wine to drink and lie with him, and give life to offspring through our father." So that night they gave their father wine to drink. The firstborn then went and lay with her father, who had no awareness of her lying down and getting up. On the morrow, the firstborn said to the younger, "Seeing that last night I lay with my father, let us give him wine to drink tonight as well. Then you go and lie with him, so that we can give life to offspring through our father." So that night too, they gave their father wine to drink. The younger got up and lay with him, and he had no awareness of her lying down and getting up. Lot's 2 daughters became pregnant through their father. The firstborn bore a son named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the present-day Moabites. The younger 2 bore a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the present-day Ammonites.
Thank you so much, Robin. Paul, would you like to read at the beginning of chapter 20?
Thank you, Rabbi. Abraham journeyed from there to the region of the south and settled between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned to Gerar. Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah, and God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, you are to die because the woman you have taken. Moreover, she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, "O my Lord, will you slay a nation even though it is righteous? Did not he himself tell me, she is my sister? And she too herself said, he is my brother. In the innocence of my heart and integrity of my hands have I done this." And God said to him in the dream, "I too knew that it was in the innocence of your heart that you did this. And I too prevented you from sinning against me. That is why I did not permit you to touch her. But now return to the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return to her, be aware that you shall surely die, you and all that is yours."
Thank you so much, Paul. Let me invite Jay. Isaac, would you like to read starting at verse 8?
Verse 8, Rabbi?
Yes, verse 8.
Thank you. Early next morning, Abimelech called his servants and told them all that had happened. And the men were greatly frightened. Then Abimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? What wrong have I done that you should bring so great a guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. What then?" Abimelech demanded of Abraham, "was your purpose in doing this thing?" "I thought," said Abraham, "surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. And besides, she is in truth my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother's, and she became my wife. So when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, let this be the kindness that you shall do to me. Whatever place we come to, say there of me, he is my brother." Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham. And he restored his wife Sarah to him. And Abimelech said, "Here, my land is before you, settle wherever you please." And to Sarah he said, "I herewith give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will serve you as a vindication before all who are with you, and you are cleared before everyone." Abraham then prayed to Adonai, and Adonai healed Abimelech and his wife and his slave girls so that they bore children. For Adonai had closed fast every womb of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham.
Thank you, Jay. Richard, would you like to read the start of chapter 21?
Yes, thank you, Reverend. The Lord took note of Sarah as he promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the same time of which God had spoken. At the set time of which God had spoken, Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had borne him, the name of Isaac. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Yet I have borne a son in his old age." The child grew up and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham playing. She said to Abraham, "Cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed."
Thank you. Steve, would you like to read a little bit at verse 14?
Oh, okay. Early next morning, Abraham took some bread and the skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness at Beersheba. And when the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away. For she thought, let me not look on as the child dies. And sitting thus afar, she burst into tears. God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and let the boy drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He dwelt in the wilderness and became a bowman. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
Thank you, Steve. And Dave, would you like to read at verse 22?
At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, chief of his troops, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything that you do. Therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my kith and kin, but will deal with me and with the land in which you have sojourned as loyally as I have dealt with you. And Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham reproached Abimelech for the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. But Abimelech said, I do not know who did this. You did not tell me, nor have I heard of it until today. Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a pact. Abraham then set 7 ewes of the flock by themselves, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what mean these 7 ewes which you have set apart? He replied, you are to accept these 7 ewes from me as proof that I dug this well. Hence the place was called Beersheba, for there the two of them swore an oath. When they had concluded the pact at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, chief of the troops, departed and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk at Beersheba and invoked there the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines a long time.
Thank you. June, would you like to read at the start of chapter 22?
Thank you, Rabbi. And it came to pass after these things that God did prove Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, here am I. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son, whom thou lovest, even Isaac, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he cleaved the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went unto the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I with the lad will go yonder, and we will worship and come back to you.
Thank you,
And
June, so much. I'm going to invite Margot. Would you like to read starting at chapter 6, verse 6?
Okay. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the two walked off together. Then Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father, and he answered, yes, my son. And he said, here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, my son. And the two of them walked off together. They arrived at the place of which God had told him. Abraham built an altar, and there he laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid Isaac on the altar on top of the wood, and Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. Then the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. When Abraham looked up, his eye fell on a ram caught in the thicket by the thorns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that site, Adonai, whence the present saying, on the mount of the Lord there is a vision.
Thank you, Margot. And David and Susan, would you like to read beginning at verse 15?
Yes. Oh, yes, thank you. And the Lord's messenger called out to Abraham once again from the heavens, and he said, by my own self, I swear, declares the Lord, that because you have done this thing and have not held back your son, your only one, I will greatly bless you and will greatly multiply your seed as the stars in the heavens and as the sand on the shore of the sea. And your seed shall take hold of its enemy's gate. And all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed because you have listened to my voice. And Abraham returned to his lads, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelled in Beersheba.
And it was after these things, and it was told to Abraham, saying, here, Milcah has given birth, she also, to sons for your brother Nahor, Uz, his firstborn, and Buz, his brother, and Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Yidlaf, and Bethuel fathered Rebekah. Milcah gave birth to these 8 for Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Rumah. She also gave birth to Teba and to Gaham and Tahash and Maacah.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our general conversation. Well, this is a Torah portion that is full of some very dramatic events. The episode at Sodom and Gomorrah, the binding of Isaac, the burying of children at a very late age. So I'd like to focus not so much on these big dramatic scenes. I'd like to focus on something rather quite simple, which has to do with these visitors who appear both to Abraham and to Lot, and explore this notion about what does it mean to have visitors in one's life. And we're going to look at the different ways that Abraham and Lot respond to these visitors. Well, first of all, the way our story opens up is, as we have noted before, a lot of our foundational stories, our opening stories, are less than clear. And that was the case certainly in Bereshit. And then when we first encounter Abraham, Lech Lecha, we see too there that it's not very clear exactly what is happening in those stories, and it's really how they open up. It requires some creative reading on our part, some real engaged reading on our part to extract meaning from it. We contribute to the expanding understanding of the stories through our active reading of what's going on. And I want to suggest the same thing is happening here with this very dramatic opening up of Parshat Vayera. The problem is that there are really, in the opening 24 verses or so of our Torah portion, it seems like there are three separate events that are happening. There is the initial event of God appearing to Abraham, and that's in our first verse. And then starting at verse 2, we have another event happening, which are these Abraham meeting these three visitors. And then starting around verse 17 and going on to about verse 33 or so, we have this dialogue happening between Abraham and God. So the question is, are these three separate scenes? Is it one continuous scene that's happening? And so our commentators weigh in. And Rashi says, this is really three separate scenes. There's the appearance of God, that's one episode, and then a very distinct episode has to do with these three visitors meeting up with Abraham. That gets concluded, and then a very distinct episode has to do with the kind of dialogue that Abraham has with God about what's going to happen with Sodom and Gomorrah. On the other hand, not so, says Maimonides. Maimonides says we really have two separate scenes going on here. The appearance of God just kind of sets the stage of things, and that's not really an episode. And the two major episodes are the Abraham's encounter with the three visitors, and then Abraham's encounter with God discussing about the future of Sodom and Gomorrah. So a lot of this hinges on how we read one particular word in particular, a word that appears in our story of Abraham meeting up with these visitors, and the same word appears when Lot meets up with some visitors. And that word is Adonai. So it's a question of how do we understand and translate that word Adonai? Is it the same in both stories, or does it have a different meaning? And what are the consequences of being the same meaning and different meaning? So let's look again at our verse here. So this is from chapter 18, and we're going to read some excerpts from verses 1 through 20. And this is on your study sheet number 1. God appeared to Abraham by the terebinths of Mamre as he sat at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 Anashim, men, were standing near him. He saw them, and he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed down. He said, Adonai, if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass on from your servant. Let me send for some water so that you may bathe your feet and rest under the tree. And then eventually we see God said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great. Now let's look at the same word Adonai as it appears in the story with Lot, and that's in number 2. 2 malachim, angels, arrived in Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and bowing low with his face to the ground, he said, Please, Adonai, turn aside to your servant's house. So there's going to be some consequences if we translate the word Adonai the same in these two incidents, or if we translate them differently. And the easiest way, of course, would be to translate them the same in both stories. So in the first one with Abraham and the visitors, when he says, Adonai, if I found favor in your eyes, please do not pass on from your servant. If we translate it the same way that we see it being used in Lot's story, where Lot says to these visitors, please, Adonai, turn aside to your servant's house. If we read it as meaning my lords, meaning noble people, then in the first case, in Abraham's incident, he's saying to these visitors, please, my lords, please do not pass on. Stay here and let me serve you. Just as we would read it in Lot's case, where he says, please, my lords, please turn aside and come to your servant's house. That would be the easiest way. However, the rabbinic reading of these two stories is quite different. And there's a consequence to reading it very differently than the simple way. And what we find is in the Talmud in Shabbat, Masechet Shabbat, we read this kind of interpolation by our rabbinic readers of how this story should really be read as regarding Abraham and his encounters. And it begins with the moral lesson that the rabbis draw from the story of Abraham's encounter with these guests. It says, hospitality towards guests is greater than receiving the divine presence. As when Abraham invited his guests, it is written, God appeared to Abraham. And Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. On seeing them, he hurried from his tent door to meet them and bowed down. Turning to God, he said, Adonai, my God, if I have found favor in your sight, please do not leave your servant. That is, please wait until I have given hospitality to these men. He then turned to the men and said, let me send for some water so that you may bathe your feet and rest under this tree. Here's the extraordinary understanding that the rabbis bring to this story that we've just read. God visits Abraham, and it seems, as the rabbis understand it, is about to have a conversation with Abraham, a conversation about Sodom and Gomorrah. But before God can get started on this conversation, these 3 visitors show up, and Abraham turns to God and said, wait a minute, hold on to that thought. Let me take care of these 3 travelers. And so what Abraham has done is he has interrupted God as God is about to speak. Please wait, I have some visitors to attend to. So what the rabbis are saying is they draw from this lesson, it's okay to interrupt your your encounter with God for the sake of taking care of some strangers, some visitors who have come into your life. That there is greater enrichment for the world, so to speak, by taking care of these strangers than by you continuing your conversation with God. The other interesting aspects of our 2 stories of Lot and Abraham, our tradition says that Abraham had no clue that these 3 visitors were divine beings in any way. And in part, that's from the actual Hebrew in our text as well, because the text says that what Abraham saw were 3 anashim, three human beings, 3 men. And without having any sense that these were people of royalty or even more of being of divine character, Abraham rushes out to take care of them. The text hints that Lot has a very different understanding, because in the story about Lot, it says 2 malachim
Angels.
arrived in Sodom, two angels. So the text is kind of hinting to us that Lot knew exactly who they were. These were divine beings. These were messengers from God. And so of course he's going to get up and rush to them and greet them and try to serve them. And the setting is also very different because Abraham is sitting in a tent out in the desert, whereas Lot is in a city. Not only is he in a city, he's sitting in the gate of the city. To sit in the gate of the city, one has to have achieved a certain level of high status within the community. So as opposed to a poor shepherd out in the desert with an open tent, we have Lot who has achieved a high level of status within his community, sitting in the city and sitting in the gates of the city, where those people would be evaluating visitors into the city, determining whether or not they were fit to come in, trying to find out what their business was, and acting as officials of the city. So Abraham and Lot are in two very different positions, and they have very different perspectives about who it is these visitors are. So Abraham is the one who interrupts his conversation with God, rushes out to meet these three people. All he sees are these are wanderers in the desert, and takes care of them. If you turn over on the study sheet and number 4, I have a bit of commentary from Rabbi Shalom of Belz. This is Shalom Rokiash, who was the founder of a particular dynasty within the Hasidic tradition. He was the founder of the Belzer Hasidim. He himself was born about 1779. He lived to about 1855 in the Ukraine. And about this story in particular, Rabbi Shalom, the Belzer Rebbe, says this. In verse 2 of chapter 18, we read that the visitors are standing above Nitzavim alav Abraham. While in verse 8, we read that Abraham is standing above them, Omed Alehem. At first, the visitors were higher than Abraham because they were angels and he a mere human being. But when he gave them food and drink and shelter, he stood even higher than the angels. Our Torah text has been dealing with Malachim for both Abraham and Lot. The question about the Malachim is, are they actual physical beings? Or are they something more than mere ephemeral presences? Are they just an inner voice? Are they a conscience? And what we're going to turn to now is the great Sufi poet, Rumi. And Rumi, in this poem called The Guest House, reminds us that visitors who can transform our lives can come from both outside ourselves and from within ourselves. So let me share with you Rumi's poem, The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. There are no shortages of visitors in our lives. The question is, what assumptions do we make about them? And how should we treat them? Do we treat them with fear Do we ignore them? Or are we being grateful for what each has to teach us? So with that, I'd like to invite everyone to share in your thoughts, reflections about this week's Torah portion. Margot?
First, please, David, I gave you the wrong advice. My husband just came home. It's warm showers, not cold showers. The glass of ice cubes, I hope I should not be practicing medicine. It's a warm shower. Take it, lie down.
I've
Now,
already lost teeth from chewing ice.
okay, I'm
Now,
sorry.
everybody on
sorry.
Facebook will have no idea what we're talking about. And
I hope you're feeling
Thanks.
better. But, I have to say,
Absolutely none.
we give so much attention to this portion, and there are many beautiful things in it, but every time I read it, I'm outraged that incest seems to be condoned, and that bothers me greatly. And because it's an abhorrent act, and every time I hear it discussed, we talk about the other aspects of this portion, but no one ever mentions that, and it bothers me.
Okay. Thank you, Margot. Thank you for drawing our attention to it. Others? Sherry?
Well, bouncing off of that same idea.
A little louder.
Oh, I said bouncing off of the same idea of the incest, is that I did a little bit of research on this particular poem. And there was a book called The Crowd of Sorrows. And there's that whole idea has been taken up with that same idea of incest, there have been books written on it. I thought that was, I have the same feeling. And the other thing I thought about, some notes I wrote down when I was going through some of the articles that I read, was the human mind is a guest house. Thoughts and emotions are visitors to the house. The guest house is used to describe life's journey and embraces mindful living and all opportunities to learn and cherish each and every moment, be grateful to our life. And that includes this crowd of sorrow. So I had a lot of trouble with that.
You have trouble welcoming in the sorrows? Is that?
Well, this particular kind of thing, because it, the aspect of incest and all of that, not that there's a condoning of it, but I mean, there's a sense that of being grateful for life, even when it brings something really hard into someone's life.
Okay.
And I just have trouble with it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Justin and then Richard.
It seems like this part of the development of consciousness in Judaism seems to be, it's approaching the issue of becoming modest or sniut, and the sense of that's a really, it's sort of it's, to me, sort of striking mythologically and psychologically that it's sort of at one end of this discussion, and I see somebody like Sigmund Freud at the other end discussing the issues of incest, totem, taboo, in a way that humanizes it and makes it possible to deal with it consciously rather than repressing it or leaving it in the unconscious, where it really can be really a terrible predicament. Just a reflection on that.
Thank you. And thank you, Justin and Richard.
Just about this
A little
issue.
louder.
Just about this issue, my note tells me that these boys that are the progeny of that affair with the daughters are the nephews of Abraham. And that's the Y chromosome from Terah. And I don't know if that's why this is in the story or not, but it stood out to me that that's an important piece of chromosome to be in the Ammonites and the Moabites. And I noticed that a couple of things in there. Sarah says, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? And when I read that, it's like, oh, she's talking about her husband is so old. How can he provide enjoyment? And then God says that she laughed, saying that about her getting a child when she was so old. And I found that a discrepancy. And also, once again, the narrator appeared for me today in 17 to 19 of verse 18. Our narrator reports what God is thinking. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? That is, the narrator is talking about what God says to himself or had said. And once again, this is a kind of aside, like his asides, where we have someone telling this story and fabricating the story. I don't mean fabricating in the story in the sense of making a false story at all, but somehow weaving it together to tell us what God is thinking. It's not just God speaking. And then about Lot, of course, why does he not say his daughters were under the shelter of his roof? So there's something about Lot and his daughters that's beyond my understanding. And whether it's a way to get to the Y chromosome, I don't know.
Thank you. And Cheryl, are you able to share with us?
Yes, Rabbi, and I apologize on, I think, behalf of almost all of us that we're not going where you wanted us to go in terms of talking about guests and where they come, because I too was taken by the women in this story that Sarai, I guess, is again, I think it's again taken for a sister, but it presents herself as a sister to her husband. That she is the one who is given a child at her late age, that Lot's wife turns back and is turned into a pillar of salt. And then her mourning children, her mourning daughters, who think that the world is ending, in that circumstance, think that the survival of the species is the most important thing, and they lie with their unconscious father. And that the children are born and no one talks about it. Nobody says, what did Lot think? How were they treated in the community? They go beyond. One of them becomes the progenitor of a people himself. It's incomprehensible that those factors are just let go. Let's just move right on. Because that's what I'm mostly taken with in this story. And there's more questions than answers, but boy, is this full of things that happen to women.
Thank you, Cheryl. Dave, did you want to say something? Dave?
Yeah, I got something here too. Funny thing, you talked about lords, and that was what I made in my first note as I was reading it. The beginning verse, chapter 18, verse 3, where Abraham first he bows down to the strangers, and then he calls them my lords. And I'm thinking, could he possibly have some inkling that these strangers are angels and from God? Second thing, as far as bowing down, then we have the Purim story where Mordecai refuses to bow down to anyone. So those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Dave. Okay. And Jay Iser? You'll have to unmute, Jay.
Thank you. These two offspring, Moab and Ammon, did we not encounter their offspring tribes later on?
Yes.
through the trip through the desert? Aren't they our enemies at that point? How do they interact with us later on? Their
Mhm.
offspring. That's what I want to know.
Thank you. I'm gonna say something about that in a moment. And David Phillips, did you want to share something?
No, thank you.
Okay,
I do.
I'll say Susan.
So I just wanted to share, I was struck with the poem by
Rumi.
Rumi. And I was reminded of David's father, who refused to lock the doors of his house or his garage where he had tools or his car, because if somebody was going to take them, they probably needed them more than he did. And I was reminded of that.
What a remarkable,
I know.
how remarkable.
My theory was always he just forgot, but
I think that was what Rabbi Kelter did too. He never locked his door in his apartment.
Let me, I want to respond to Paul. Did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to take off a little bit on what Dave Live was talking about. Your section 1 and your section 2 in your comments, and these two sections kind of give us an opportunity to look at God like almost like a Steven Spielberg, that he's God. He has the right to orchestrate, and he kind of sets up the scene on the stage where Abraham, he sends him 3 normal people, they're Nashim. So it's set up that he could actually perform and be great. So, and you know what, the whole discussion that he has with him, I look at as kind of trivial, because he knows in advance that what he's going to do with Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a done deal. So he gives him some dialogue. But what does he do to Lot? So Lot, he doesn't give him a chance. He right away, he sends these malachim. They're obviously angels. He knows about it. And of course, he does as best he could with what he's given. And so between 1 and 2, you begin to see a little bit of maybe there's a lot of aspects of God that's very human, that, if you want the hero to look like a hero, you set it up so he can be the hero. If you want somebody to be in the first act, you want him to be the fall guy, you set him up that way. But it gives you a certain feeling that in a way there's one guy is good and one guy is bad, but is it programmed that way?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. And I want to begin by just responding to something that Cheryl said. And while I appreciate very much her sense that I'm trying to lead us somewheres, the truth is I'm not trying to lead us anywheres. I just offer my own thoughts and reflections about the weekly Torah portion, and then we open it up for discussion. And my only hope in our sessions is that we will create the kind of space and the kind of enthusiasm and engagement with the text where everyone will have an opportunity to share what he or she thinks about when reading the text. So there's no particular destination I'm trying to get us to. I'm just trying to create an environment where people feel liberated and engaged with the material. I do want to say one thing about the issue that Margot first raised, and that Justin commented on and Sherry commented on in particular, which has to do with the notion of these terrible events that happened here, especially with Lot and Lot's daughters. We condemn the behavior, and tradition condemns the behavior. And the poem of Rumi is not about in any way condoning bad things happening to bad people. What Rumi's poem is about is, if you want to evolve, if you want to grow as a person, you can't repress experiences that you've had. You have to allow these experiences to come to the fore. You need to welcome these experiences that you've had, these feelings that you've had, if you want to deal with them. And it was Justin, I think, who mentioned Freud. I mean, Freud was an example of that trajectory in Jewish tradition, which says, to the extent we suppress our experiences, we become more deformed human beings. And the way to become a more fully developed human being is to acknowledge them, to greet these feelings. And this is something the Baal Shem Tov talks about as well in matters of prayer. If you're praying and all of a sudden you have some kind of licentious, erotic thought, you shouldn't try and beat it down. You shouldn't try and suppress it. You should acknowledge it and say something like, we will have a discussion later. I see that you have, this moment of prayer has released you from the dark chambers where you've been hiding, and you've now come to my consciousness. I acknowledge you, and I will talk with you later. Right now, I'm praying. So this is all within the Jewish tradition of the importance of not denying things that we've experienced or felt. And here's how it happens within our written text as well. Because the outcome of the encounter, of the incestuous encounter that Lot has with the daughters, one of them is a child known as Moab, who becomes the head of a tribe known as the Moabites. And yes, at some point in time, they become our arch enemies. And in fact, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, don't allow any Moabite into the congregation of the people of Israel. There's a counter trend within our Bible that says, no, it's okay to let them in, because when you let them in and you encounter them, then there's possibility of redemption. And that's what happens in our Bible. In the book of Ruth, Ruth is a Moabite. She is brought into the congregation of the people of Israel, and eventually she becomes, I think it's the great grandmother of King David. So this is an example, if you will, in narrative terms of this message that is throughout our tradition about, if you acknowledge what has happened to you, if you give light to dark experiences, there's a possibility for redemption. These are some of the most troublesome and problematic visitors any of us could have. It's not the ones who knock on the door of our physical home. It's those visitors who are dwelling within us right now that we deny, suppress, avoid, and don't deal with. Though, to the extent we acknowledge them and bring those visitors to the surface, look at them, confront them, have a conversation with them, the possibility for transformation and redemption is there. I want to thank each and every one of you for helping to create this kind of an environment where we feel liberated to share with one another our engagements with this text and become transformed thereby. Thank you all. God bless you all. Look forward to our gathering next time.
Bye, everyone.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I
Bye,
hope
good
you
night.
feel better.